Okay, welcome to the first astrology hacker meeting. We're just even discussing whether we call it astrology hackers going forward, but um, here we go. So thanks, whoever came. This was a really small group, our first one. I'm glad you're here. Um, and we're going to talk about relationships. So the idea of this astrology hackers group is to create an environment where we can discuss very complicated astrology, Jyotish topics and try to simplify them, try to find ways to easily get remedies going and understand and use the tool nicely in our modern world. So let's just jump in. I have some slides about relationships that I'm gonna go through. And then I'm going to leave open time at the end and we're going to have questions. Even if you have charts you want to look at or whatever. So I made some slides. I picked charts of a couple of friends of mine who are married for 22 years or something like that. So no names on there or whatever, but these are people I know. They're not famous or anything like that. Maybe infamous, but not famous. So, all right. So like, I'm going to go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and start with um, my slides. So does everybody see that okay?
I can see it.
Cool. Um, um, let's get that out of the way. Okay. Alrighty. So relationships, kind of one of the big three questions that us astrologers handle relationships, I would say is number one. Well, not in order. Relationships, health, and money. Those are really often the big three things. Okay, so first thing I wanted to point out that the big relationship energy in charts comes through opposition. So we all know the first house is about the self, the seventh house is about relationships or the other people. So that alone, even just that whole idea of the first house, seventh house, that's something to think about. And that is the opposition aspect. To me, it creates this clear channel between two signs. So we essentially, with the zodiac having 12 signs, we have six pairs of oppositions. I've said this in readings before, but I feel like there's kind of three types of relationships based on these six pairs. Um, we've got the Mars-Venus oppositions in the zodiac. We've got the Jupiter-Mercury oppositions, and then we've got the Saturn versus the luminaries. I probably have that later in the in my slides, and I'm just jumping the gun. Um, so you both are familiar with these things, I think, but the first house, which we can call the rising sign, ascendant, or lugna, is where we study the self. And the seventh house is the other person or how we conduct relationships. And that said, anything you're looking at in the chart, the moon, the sun, the rising sign, anything, if you look at the seventh house from that, it's like a channel toward that thing, like an opening or a doorway. So the opposition has to do with relationships. And it's not always a good relationship. I mean, war is a relationship, fighting is a relationship, sex is a relationship. I mean, there's all kinds of natures of relationships. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. Um, but that 1-7 channel, which is a straight across opening in the zodiac, really makes us able to face each other and make room for engagement. So most of this I've kind of said in my commentary, but this last part here with Mars and Venus, um, with Mars being the ruler of Aries, which is the first natural sign of the zodiac, and Venus, who rules Libra, who's the seventh natural sign of the zodiac, there's something about this Mars and Venus energy that's very relationship oriented. I feel like when Mars and Venus are involved in relationship, there's passion, there's not always harmony, not always not always fighting. It's just those are the dramatic relationship marking planets, I believe. All right. So I would say the first thing we're going to do when we're looking at relationships is we're looking, first of all, we have to get each person understand what their whole scene is. And we have to understand that we're not just one thing. We're our body, mind, and spirit. So when we're really trying to compare two charts, we want to those are the big three or like the legs of the stool, I think, uh, of us or any chart. Who are we physically, who are we mentally, and who are we spiritually? So those all three of those things need to be understood when we're doing relationship study. So we're studying the first house. So this is just one chart, one person's chart. We study the first house. We study the Lord of the first house and the seventh house and its Lord. And this might show how we even physically relate to relationships. Then we can compare moons. Moon is more about the mental compatibility or the mental orientation to what is a relationship. The moon is specifically the emotional, sensitive part of our mind. When maybe when we get into these long-term relationships and we're really close with somebody, every little thing they say or do, it becomes very prominent. It bugs us. So there's that mental part of how do we receive the other person. So, and then the sun, or you guys know that I love the whole Charakaraka system and the Atmakaraka, which is the soul indicator planet. So the sun and or the soul indicator planet, they can both show the person's spiritual soul level. That's also something we have to consider when we're talking about relationships, is how are we going to maintain our soul connection? So we study the sun or the Atmakaraka and the seventh from that one to really see those deep things. All right. And so then we've got, if we're taking a relationship between two people, what I like to do is to first really understand each of the charts separately so that I don't get confused about um, how they're going to work together. Or, sometimes what if this is my friend coming to me and said, "Oh, I just met this person and I'm just over the moon." Um, I need to be careful with that person and trying to make the other person look better or worse than they really are for them, right? So it's good to understand each of the individual charts and what they want and what they're ready for and what they need in relationships. So we study from all those points I mentioned in the last slides, looking at oppositions, looking at the seventh house. You can look at the soul indicator planet. We can also look at the indicator planet for the spouse. Try to look at what the first house looks like. What are all the aspects coming into that first house? What about the first house ruler? Are they conjunct with somebody? What aspects are hitting that first house ruler? Same with the seventh house. And you can take just a notepad and start just writing these things down, especially if you're beginning to try to help somebody with relationship stuff. Just write these quick things down in a systematic way. It's a good place to start. And then you can also look into timing. We have the dashas. Somebody might be, their chart might show like, wow, this person is really here on this planet to just explore through relationships. But they may be in a dasha that doesn't support that particular project right now. So those are things to think about too. And transits are important. If the person has a lot of Saturn influence and Saturn is transiting somewhere, it can take a long time for Saturn to transit. And so we have to combine the chart and the dashas and the transits to see if timing is right for the relationships. And then we go to the other chart. We go to the other we go to the other place in our own chart. Like, okay, I'm getting myself in the first house. Let's really look at the seventh house. It's going to show the type of people that you might be interacting with. It might show how you relate to relationships. Both of those things. It's not just the other person, it's also your reaction and your agenda and MO and how you relate. So you want to study that seventh house, all the aspects coming into that seventh house. Where is that seventh house Lord? What planets are they with? What signs and houses does that seventh house Lord go to? And then we'll know where and how that person is going to begin to experience their relationships. Last point, look at the first house and the seventh house separately and say, all right, which one is stronger? Stronger, that's a whole other lesson, but there's a whole idea of like houses, signs, and planets and their strength. Lots of different calculations. One really simple strength notation is there a planet there? Is there two planets there? Like a planet in a house makes it stronger. Whether or not it's a good planet for the sign or house doesn't matter. It's more about, is there anybody there? So that's just one quick way you can think, okay, who's stronger? Now, let's take, for example, let's say there's an Aries rising, and that means Libra is the seventh house. If we have Mercury in the first house in Aries, and Saturn in the seventh house in Libra, that's pretty equal. Mercury in the first house is great. Mercury in Aries is okay, whatever. Um, Saturn is exalted in Libra. So that kind of example would be, I would say, oh, that's pretty equal. There's a pretty equal balance between that first and seventh house. Why I'm getting to this, like, what if Aries is empty and it's your first house and you've got three planets sitting in Libra? It could show that that could mean that the seventh house is stronger and that the person may lean on the partner. They may desire somebody who's a stronger, more clear person. So just thinking about something like that. Okay. Now I'm talking about the seventh house being relationship oriented in general, but I wanted to point out that we have all kinds of relationships. We don't just have, intimate partnerships. So, I just made a list here of the different types of relationships that come up in each house. So, for example, the first house I think is our relationship with ourself. Some philosophers will argue with me about the ability to have a relationship with ourself, but I'm sticking to my guns here. The second house can show how we relate to family, whether it's our parents or, children, our family upstream and downstream. The third house can show how we relate to siblings and acquaintances. The fourth can show mother and caregiver relationships. And I'm going to take a second here to point out that when I work with people about relationships, it's inevitable almost that we have to go then deeper into, well, what was your relationship with your mom and what was your relationship with your dad? The parental relationships come in really big in intimate relationships, I think. So studying the relationships out of the fourth house with the mother and the ninth house with the father becomes pretty cogent with analyzing relationships. So fifth house can show relationships with children, um, dating, romance, connections like that, um, clients, students. The sixth house shows how we relate with rivals, enemies, and competitors. The seventh house shows our general behavior in relationships, what kind of people we're attracted to intimately, business partners, that type of thing. Eighth house shows how we relate to debtors and debt holders. So you can extend that to, you know, our feeling of I owe you something or you owe me something, and how we relate to that energy. Benefactors, people who just give you money, spiritual relationships too. Ninth house shows our fathers, our teachers, and divinity. How do we relate to all that? 10th house, how do we relate to employers, bosses, or the government? 11th house shows our elder siblings, colleagues, team members, band members, if you're in a band, just your general community. How do you relate to being in a group? 12th house shows really deep relationships like marriage, or relating to divinity, spiritual. It's kind of like the ninth house. So that is that. Okay, so this synastry thing, we're probably going to have to do a whole other maybe our next meeting will just be part two of this, and we'll work with more of this synastry idea. Um, so it's the practice of laying two charts over on top of each other and see how they interact. So again, I want to stress it's really, really smart to study each chart individually before you combine them. Really get an idea of objectively who is this person and who is that person. And then overlay them. I think it gets really confusing overlaying them first and then without understanding the individuals separately. Uh, the South Indian chart format makes it easy. Um, I tend to use the South Indian chart as we go forward in this group. I'll probably have, the North and South available just because everybody has a different mind and way of looking at things. But because the South Indian chart has all of the signs static, always in the same spot in that square, it makes it easier to do this overlaying synastry thing. And then we can see how they start talking to each other. So, this point here, the system of counting how many houses from one planet, I have this written wrong, one to another, is important. So, just like we have six pairs of oppositions in the 12 signs, there's six types of relationships between houses. So the 1-7, and just a note, when we're starting to count how many houses away is a thing in the chart, we always include the spot where, like, let's say I'm looking at the moon and I want to know what's sixth house from the moon. I count that moon as the first house. I say, okay, moon is one, and then I start going in the South Indian chart clockwise around until I get to six. So there are these six styles of planets being away from each other. So we have the 1-7, as I said, that's the most natural relationship, very clear channel open, um, great for connecting, positive or negative. Uh, when we're right across the table from each other, we can really connect, we can really understand each other, and we can really, really hurt each other. There's that. So then the next one is 2-12. Okay, so for example, let's say we have Moon in Aries and in our chart. And then in the other person's chart, they have Moon in Taurus, which is the next sign over. So those two moons are going to be in a 2-12 relationship. If I start at the Aries moon and I count one and then two, I get to the Taurus moon. If I start at the Taurus moon and count all the way to the Aries, I start with Taurus and I count one all the way around, and then I get to 12 at Aries. So there's a 212 relationship. 212 relationships are challenging. I'm just going to say it. That's a little bit of a showing a challenge. 311 relationships, same counting thing. If you can remember that the third house and the 11th house in the chart have to do with siblings and groups, 311 relationships are workable. They're very workable relationships. They may not always be exactly romantic, but they're very they're equal, they're work oriented. So I like 311 signatures when I'm comparing charts. 410, okay, remember the 4 has to do with mom and the 10 has to do with bosses. So so 410 relationships again are very workable. Are they good romantically? I don't know, but they're very supportive. They're very supportive. Um, so 410s maybe are good for business partners, something like that. Or within a marriage, for example, it could show that the two people have a very good working relationship with practical things. That could be. 5-9 relationships are very harmonious. When we have 5-9s, then those two planets are going to be in the same element because all of the elements are in that 120 degrees from each other. So 5-9s, there's a lot of harmony. Doesn't mean the relationship's going to be perfect, but I would say it's positive. 6-8, difficult. 6 and 8 are both Dushtana numbers, which means there's trouble, there's difficulty, there's strife, there's pushing, there's depth. So 6-8 relationships can be a little friction filled. So that's a lot to take in, those all of that, but it really becomes important when you're quickly trying to see how two people's moons are, how are their suns, how are their rising signs, and then you're getting an idea of like how harmonious or difficult are certain parts of that relationship going to be. So that's what I'm suggesting here. And then I'm just putting down here, oops, I don't mean to do that. When we're talking about the different 9 planets and comparing them, just a quick little hit on relationship stuff. Like the sun's going to show, comparing the two suns will show how the egos are going to get along. And comparing the two moons is going to show how the emotional connection is going to be. Comparing the Marses was going to show where there's going to be power or control, harmony, or issues. Mercury, super important for relationships because communication. What's our communication style? Jupiter is going to show how we relate to growing and do we want children? Do we have children? That kind of thing. Venus will show how we compromise, how deeply we love, how we connect with people. Saturn shows boundaries, how committed we can become in long term, and how experienced we are. Rahu shows our desires. Comparing the two people's Rahus is interesting. K2 can show, I said Rahu desire instability. I kind of meant instability, but I'm not judging. So K2 can show how you compare people's K2s can show how they connect spiritually or how there can be blockages between the two people. Okay, finally, we're at these charts. So what I have here is I have both the South and North Indian view here. So just take a moment and start gazing here. On the left is the wife, both of them. So the top is south, bottom is north, and then on the right is the husband. I tried to keep this really simple because we just want to look at We don't want to get bogged down with dashas or anything like that. I made a few notes, but let's just take a moment and do a quick synastry on um, sun, moon, and rising, and maybe the Atmakaraka, because I have that marked here. You can see AK is Atmakaraka. And when we're talking about relationships and marriages, we want to look at the DK, which is the spouse indicator. Um, so there's that. And then, anyway, so let's just start with the first house. Okay. For this person, the wife, she is Gemini rising. So Mercury is important. We have to look where that goes to. Gemini has Jupiter ruling the seventh house. So Jupiter becomes important. I would say which house is stronger here, the first house or the seventh house? Neither one of them has any planets. So what we do is then go to the Lord and we say, okay, well, Jupiter, the seventh house Lord, goes to Libra. There's no planets, but so that's about equal. It's not really in a friendly sign either, let's say. Mercury, the first house ruler, goes to Leo. That's fine. It's with K2, so by counting, it's a little stronger because it's with another planet. But it's K2. That's the sixth house lord. So I would say the first and seventh house lords and houses seem pretty equal in strength. Neither one of them is extremely strong. So, okay, that's interesting. Um, the husband, he's got Libra rising. The first house has no planets. The seventh house has no planets. The lords, the first house lord is Venus over here in Capricorn. It's a friendly sign in the fourth house. Oh, it's also the spouse indicator for this guy. And the seventh house ruler is Mars. It's down here in Sagittarius, friendly sign, no other planets. And it's this guy's Atmakaraka. That's interesting. The Mars Venus thing runs strong with this guy. But I would say neither one of them has a weaker or stronger first or seventh house. So right off the bat, I'm going to say, okay, well, it's not like their relationship is going to be perfect, but maybe there's a pretty good balance between, maybe there's a feeling of equality between these two. There's not a lot of power struggle. Okay, that's interesting. Now, Gemini and Libra are in a 5-9 relationship with each other. They are both in the same element, air element. So the 5-9 relationship, what did I say about that? Oh, there's harmony. There's harmony between that. So personality-wise, physically, intelligence, these two are probably on the same page. They've both got air sign rising. They're probably going to get along for the most part. Okay, that's interesting. Now let's just jump to the moon. The wife's moon is in Virgo, and the husband's moon is in Pisces. So if we could take these two charts and lay them on top of each other, we would see that they have moons in opposite signs. That's great. That's good. That shows that the two people are gonna, at least on an emotional level, they're going to see each other. Is it always going to be easy? Are they always going to agree? No. But for the most part, I would say that that is a positive thing between these two people. The wife even has the moon and Venus together. Very feminine, very loving planets. And they're both opposite of this guy's moon. Okay, wow, that's not bad. All right, let's compare the sun. All right, wife has sun in Cancer with a debilitated Mars, and the husband has sun in Scorpio with K2 and Mercury. So when we're looking at the sun, we can look at the soul, but we're also looking at the ego. Let's say this is the ego of the people. So Um, they both have sun and water signs. If you could lay these on top of each other, you would see that the suns are also in a 5-9 relationship. So there's harmony even with the ego. How interesting. So right off the bat, I mean, those just that simple three things. I'm thinking, this couple might be okay. Um, they have a lot of harmony and they can see each other. Now, is it perfect? Probably not. Okay, so just a quick thing. I'm just going to flip over here and tell you a few things. Okay, so the wife, she has Saturn, AK, Moon, DK, which is the Dara Karaka, Jupiter as the PUK, which is the children, and Rahu as the AMK. I'm bringing up the AMK because that in the list of those Charakarakas, it's the second one. I feel like it's all of our um, biggest helper planet. So sometimes we're getting into relationships with uh, the DK, who's our spouse, really a deep relationship. But sometimes we might be wanting to get into a relationship with the planet that helps us the most. So it's just, I wanted just to point out what we're attracted to. They both have Rahu as the same role. So, um, anyway, those are just interesting things I noticed. All right, then when they got married, the wife was in Rahu Venus and the husband was in Venus Moon. They've been married since 2002. So that's 22 years. They have no children. And the wife is the main breadwinner. So those are just some things about these people. I'm going to go back to the charts now. So I think it's interesting that um, like if you want to just look at the two people, like we went rising sign, moon, and sun. Let's look at the soul indicator planets and see what that relationship is. So the wife has Saturn as the Atmakaraka. It's in Aries, which let's lay these on top of each other. Her soul indicator planet winds up in his seventh house. I would say that's another checkbox for a positive. Um, and the man's soul indicator planet, Mars, ends up in her seventh house. Wow, another checkbox. Um, so I was like I'm like, well, okay, now I can see why they're together. Okay. Now again, look at the wife's chart. Um, and this is another thing, I didn't write this down in the list, but in a traditional way, they say that you can look at Jupiter in a woman's chart to see the husband, and in a man's chart, you can see Venus for the wife. The world we live in, I feel like that's going to be going the way of the dinosaur, but anyway, that's the traditional thing. So it's interesting to me that she has Jupiter opposite her soul indicator. To me, this shows like somebody who really is in it for relationship. She's in this life to probably explore this relationship with this guy. Um, And for this guy, Venus turns out to be the spouse indicator. And back to the soul indicators, they're both in fire signs. They are in a 5-9 with each other. So again, there's harmony even at the soul level with these folks. So anyway, that is I'm going to stop here. I want to take questions or just discuss or see what your reactions are to any of all this stuff that I just said. So was that clear or was that helpful? Did you guys get any kind of feelings from those things? Was it too confusing, too much? Tell me. Oh, I can't hear you,
No, I
Melanie.
thought that was really helpful. I've never done that before. Oh, what? Can you?
Go ahead,
Melanie,
Joey.
you are muted, I
Oh,
think.
I was just saying I thought that was helpful. It brought up some questions. Um, no, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. I've never done the synastry like that. With the houses away.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, and like I didn't even go deeply into that because you could also, I mean, because you can do the synastry or the houses away thing, you can do in an individual chart as well. Like, let's say, for example,
mhm.
that my first house ruler and my seventh house ruler are in a 6-8 relationship. That could show that I often have relationships that have strife in them, me personally. Nothing to do with anybody else. Like that could be a thing to do as well. And then you can also compare the two charts with those 6-8-1-7 things.
Um, what do you think is like the most important? Because like there's okay, with that, there's so many things you can check in that realm, like, oh, there's that. So like what do you think are like, like the top five most important like things to do that with?
Well, those top three, the rising sign, the moon, the sun, and the soul indicator, there's four.
Okay.
Comparing all those things. And then you're going to have
Okay.
to get specific in each chart because, um, like my seventh house ruler, you could go for the seventh house and like look at that ruler and find those relationships too.
Seventh house ruler. Okay,
Yep.
cool. Yeah, just wanted to know like the most important ones because since like you could do a lot of stuff there.
You could. And then the more stuff
Also,
you do, the more confusing it gets, doesn't it?
yeah, exactly, right? So it's like cool. So like five would be good, like base ones. And also, I think Melanie shared in the thing that wait, do you say you and your husband have a 6-8
I think we have a
relationship?
6-8, yeah.
With what? Your moons?
With our moons, yeah.
With the moons. So what
So
are some
my
of the
question is
other
like,
what are the other things, Melanie?
Um, well, I can share it if you, because I pulled it up if you want.
I think you can share, try if you
Let
can.
me, um,
yeah, my question just being like, what if something comes up like, no way, like bad news, like how, what does it take to like cancel that out or like how big a deal is like one of the like a big things coming up difficult? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Um,
so yeah. Well,
that's
I can
that's a
tell you
great question.
how it plays out, how the difficulty plays out, I think. But, um,
Okay, so on the left is Melanie, and then
well, I
oh,
think
I see. They're inner
I'm on
outer.
the,
Okay, cool.
they're inner outer, but they're, because we're both Gemini rising, like you can just like literally put them over each other.
Yeah. Okay, for this one. Okay, so
Yeah.
David is inner on the left and Melanie's inner on the right. Okay. So the Gemini but rising both really helps. So Melanie's got moon in Pisces. David's got moon in Libra. So Melanie, is there there but the Gemini both being there really I think fixes a lot, you could say.
Hmm.
Even the suns are also the same.
Yeah, we're born on the same day, just a year apart. So it,
Mercury's the same. You know, so that's probably a big uh helper. But also let's say, okay, so what nakshatra is the moon in because we can go deeper. I was trying to keep it simple, but we're going to go with nakshatras now. So, Melanie, what's your nakshatra and David's?
Oh, I don't know that off the top of my head. I'd have to.
Okay. So what I'm saying is like even though there's a 6-8 between the moons, I would say there's a lot of other harmony there.
Mhm.
Um, would you say, Melanie, that there is do you ever feel that 6-8 feeling emotionally within your relationship?
Oh yeah, like my dream, like, and this has been my longstanding dream, has been to live next door to my family. Like I love
Luxurious.
them, I just don't need them all the time. Like we could have two separate like I don't particularly love vacationing with him. Sometimes it's great, but like, and it's not because we don't really get along, but it's just like there's a like even working at home, it's like I don't know why there's some like sense of that I don't have my full freedom,
Interesting.
or like I'm whole like, and I don't know, like I'm not, and like there's no objective, like he's not oppressing, like he doesn't, like he's super generous. There's no, like nothing is coming down on
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
hard. I just like I'm super weird about like doing my Kalari routine at home. Like, or when he said like, and I have like, it makes, and like he doesn't care that I'm exercising in the house. I really don't care either, but it's like weird, like my body has a real problem with it.
That's interesting.
Or like to not have all the like, like my own little like hermit cave. I don't know if I should have, but that's kind of, but I think that's sort of how that maybe shows up
Hmm.
if I had to.
It might be also helpful that even though the moons are in 6-8, that like in your chart, Melanie, the moon is with the sun and Mercury, which are common in both charts. So I would say that helps a
Mm,
lot. And I also want to say that part of my astrology hacker mentality is okay, we think, the traditional books are going to make us think 6-8 relationships are just the worst and it's not going to work and it's horrible and there's friction. Okay, that's one side of the coin, but the other side of the coin to me is what am I here for? Am I here to eat cake and pie? And like, no, my soul is here to work through things. So if you are here to work, 6-8 relationships may not be that bad. I mean, that's
yeah.
work and transformation.
Well, what's really interesting, I'll say, and I know this, I can speak to it better through um Western astrology just because I've said it more through that lens. But so my husband and my mother have moons in the exact same degree.
Interesting.
And so, and I recognize that this is like uh, like I'm getting closer to the city of what that looks like. Like my mother in my relationship is very much the shadow of what that looks like.
Mhm.
I have two girlfriends who also have moons in the exact same degree that my husband and my mother do.
Wow.
And so it's really like, it's just like I can, and because I do this with my clients, like I'm like, I can like, oh, we are repeating these patterns, but like this is maybe an evolved or just like a different, way that shows up. Like in my Western astrology, I have Uranus in my fourth house. So like I find having a mother very inconvenient, not into it, you know, and
Yeah.
that's probably why I want my own house too, not into sharing space.
It's the fourth house thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so that degree in Libra, your homework is to go see what nakshatra that is.
Yeah. I'll definitely
Go learn what
check
that
that
is
out. Yeah.
and see because there's a lot of energy in that nakshatra for you, I think, in
Yeah.
Libra. So, um yeah, I mean, we could do this forever. And so back to this kind of thing of like what stands out to me if I see two charts and I'm like, run. Don't, this is a no-go zone.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's really tough
Yeah.
because because that brings up the other part that I didn't really note down on the slides, but that I was thinking about, which is like we also have to look at reality and history. Like, what is the person's relationship history? Are they incarcerated right now? Like what is the reality of like actually happening in this person's life? How many marriages have they had? How many kids do they have? What were their parents like? I mean, these are things we have to also look
Are
at.
they a
And
narcissist? Like,
that, what did you say,
I said,
Julie?
is the other person a narcissist? Like,
There we are.
if
Exactly. Or
you,
is the other person
if
a
you,
people pleaser? Or,
you,
and that's why we have to understand those individual charts. Okay, so I'm just going to say it like those two friends that I just showed you their charts, since I'm not saying who they are. Um, it was funny because the other day, and this is probably why I picked these charts, the other day I was like, we actually don't hang out with these people very much anymore because the guy's a narcissist. Okay. And I'm just like, I don't want to hang out with that guy anymore. I'm done. I'm over it. And so for whatever reason, the other day I was like, I wonder if she'll ever just like say F off to him. Like that was my question. So then I looked at her.
you
Um,
think that if somebody has really good, oh, sorry,
that's okay.
sorry.
Um, go ahead, Julie. What was your question?
Do you think that if somebody has like really good compatibility, even if somebody's a narcissist, that like it could work, Like,
That's what I think. I think that it is working with these people. So
yeah.
because I went in and I'm like, is she ever going to just, bail? I think, and I started looking at her chart and I was like, oh, she's a Saturn AK. She just got into the Saturn period, like in August. That's 19 years. Saturn is opposite Jupiter in her chart. She had the Jupiter period. So I'm like, she's not going to leave. She's going to stay through the Saturn period. Like they're not going to break up. They're going to live together their whole lives. And it's working, even though he's a narcissist.
But don't you find that like Saturn is kind of the glue that holds the fact that Saturn is her soul
Soul planet.
indicator maybe plays into that?
Yeah, and I would say, I don't know that Saturn's the glue, but I would say Saturn in this case particularly is um maybe uh, maybe she has a low self-esteem and Saturn is debilitated in Aries
Mm.
and she's a Gemini rising. So it's interesting because like I said, she's the breadwinner. She mostly, I mean, he makes a little money here and there, but she really has a steady job. She's had a steady job. She earns the money. They have whatever, no kids. Which I think is weird from her chart too, because she has Jupiter as the Putra Karaka in the fifth house. Like that's really a child thing. But I also feel like he is the child that she has, actually. I honestly, that's how I think
Fun.
it works. And she is humble enough to just put up with his BS. She probably turns around and rolls her eyes. And here's just a quick story. A couple summers ago, they popped in. He always wants to go out to this restaurant that we don't go out to. We're both vegetarians. So is his wife. Three vegetarians, one non-vegetarian. And so he said, do you guys want to get takeout at this place? And I said, I don't think they have anything that I want. Oh, the pozzole's so good. The pozzole's so good. I'm like, it probably has chicken stock in it. He's like, let me call. So he called the restaurant and he's like kind of on the other side of the deck and I'm listening to what he says. I'm listening to him talking and he's saying, is there chicken stock in the pozole? And I can hear that they say yes. And he says, but it's a tomato base. And I can hear them say, well, it has chicken stock in it also. And then he comes over and he's like, it's vegetarian. He totally lied.
He
So
didn't make you poop weird. That's not
So he
cool.
goes and like picks up the food, brings it back, And he's like, does anybody
He
want to
lied
fold?
about the
So,
vegetarian. That's
so
messed
to
up.
his wife on the side, I'm like, it's not vegetarian. Like, it's just not. And it's like she just lets that shit slide. So, like, that's the thing. So that Saturn, AK, I think really makes her humble. And it's just like, I'm just gonna let him be the child. I don't feel like fighting it. There must be something else supportive there. So anyway, and so back to your question of is there something that I'm like, oh, that's absolutely not going to work? I try to be really careful about that because real life is different. Like, what if I had told Melanie, oh man, everything looks good except for those moons are a 6-8, so screw this David guy, we're not going to go with him. I would have been wrong. I would have been bad advice,
Hmm.
and I would have been,
Right. Totally. That's another good segue into, I don't know if this is like a whole other section, but I think it'd be really helpful just to talk about like how to deliver information and like what kind of it, maybe that's like a whole nother class, but make a note of that because I feel like that's a huge piece of it is like how to even deliver things and what kind of things is it even like, exactly, like sometimes it's like you don't want to say things, but at a certain point you kind of have to.
yeah. And for example, like I've come up on cases where I'm showing people charts and they'll say, "Oh, well, that guy looks like, his seventh house looks violent. So maybe he's a rapist." And I'm like, maybe, but I'm tricking them because the reality
It's hard
is,
to know. Nobody's one of those until they do it, you know?
well, let's say the energy of rape appears in that seventh house. But I've kind of tricked people and been like, oh, what does this guy look like? Oh, he looks like he's violent and dangerous. And I'm like, yeah, but the reality is that he was the victim of that. He was the victim of that. He wasn't the perpetrator. So that's where you get to be really careful because is the person
Mm.
doing it or are they
And
having it
checking
done
the
to them?
reality situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to be
Yeah.
really careful delivering judgments on people, I think.
Yeah, totally.
We're not here to
Because I've
judge.
also heard somebody said this to me, and then it came up in a reading I was doing that's like, they're like, but people say that the charts of enlightened masters and like serial killers can like look the same, like really intense ones. And then I was doing a reading for a friend of mine, and her chart came up one of the craziest ones I've ever seen. She had every single planet in Capricorn, like all together bunched up.
Yeah.
And
1962.
I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but it was besides the moon, which was in Scorpio, it
Yep.
was all in the second house. And I was just like looking at her chart, I was like, oh my God. But because I know her as a human being, I could see that I was like, you have been through hell to
I
like
mean,
come
that's what
out
that
not
chart
a
is.
psychopath. What?
That's what that chart is. If she's a Sagittarius rising with all those planets in Capricorn, that whole,
No, that was her second house. Everything was in Capricorn, but the moon was in Scorpio.
that's what I'm saying, that if she's rising Sagittarius, moon
Uh-huh.
would be in the 12th,
Yeah.
right? And then all those other planets in the second. Like a lot of those people born around that time, I think it was 61 or 62, there was a time when there was
That
all
could be
those
right. She's older. I don't know the date off the top of my head, but that
a lot of those people came through at a time that was such like a lot of suffering, and a lot of these people have that signature.
right. She did a lot of abuse in her like a lot of abuse in her childhood. Like
Yeah,
a lot. Like
that's
it was
sad.
horrible. Like, it was. I was um but again, it's like to tell her it's like, man, you could have been a psychopath. Like you really could have. Like the kind of stuff like dealing with that kind of abuse, that's what makes somebody a crazy person.
But I'll
Or
tell
with
you,
her
I'll
in
tell
her
you
case,
what,
she's working on herself, and so she's just done so much work on herself that she's really incredibly solid because she went the other direction. You know what I mean?
Yep, I do. Yep.
Yeah.
I know another person with that chart essentially. And I mean, she's a brilliant person, but she's an immigrant, a person of color, and gay. So she's had to fight 10 times harder
Okay.
for everything.
Yeah.
Like if she was a white
Interesting.
man, she'd be way up here already. So anyway, but your friend with that chart, that moon, looks sad because it's the eighth house ruler in the 12th house. That looks like, oh my God, how is she even alive, right?
It's in Scorpio. It's not in a
It's
strong.
debilitated too, right? It's eighth house lord in the
Yeah.
12th. That's
Yeah.
really bad, it seems like. But and then maybe one day we'll do a yoga's class, all the combinations, but there's actually something called a Vipreet Raj Yoga, where if a one Dhisthana lord goes to another Dhisthana, it's actually really good. It's like a double negative. So, like your friend had all of that hardship, but it made her stronger. Didn't kill her.
Totally. And the
That's
moon was like her way out. Like in the chart, I was like, it's got to do something with the moon. There's something. There was one path out for you, and you found it. Like
yeah.
basically, like
Yep.
like
So, anyway, like that's that'll be us wedging into this whole relationships thing. It's such a deep, huge topic. And like yesterday, I had a regular client bring me a chart. She had gone on a date with the guy, and she looked his birthday up and doesn't have his time, knew where he was born because he told her. And I looked at the two, I guessed, as far as I just had to rectify a little bit based on what she said for a rising sign for him. But I was like, wow, I mean, it looks like there's no red flags here. That's the way I said it. Rather than like focusing on little things that might have been a problem. Uh, to me, there wasn't any kind of major danger. So that's what I said. I don't see red flags. Um, and maybe that's a way to deliver difficult information is to not make a judgment like, hey, I wouldn't go here at all.
yeah,
Because we don't know reality. Say things like, okay, I'm seeing a red flag here. It's not a no-go, but I just want to call attention to the potential of conflict here.
yeah. With
Because it is so
here's a
easy to influence somebody or make them scared when they come to you vulnerable. I mean, so you have to be
for
very careful.
sure. Love, they will throw out every red flag and be like, whatever. Like no.
And again, you can't stop that either, right?
Because when I see Rahu at Makarakas, I call that like a deal breaker. Like I'm like, nope. And is that correct? Because I'm Sun at Makaraka, so I just see that as being like, and I did that dance for a long time with somebody, so I'm just like, I'm not
Well, for you, it
doing
might,
that again.
like
But is
for
that
you,
being
that might
too
be true.
harsh with my own? Sorry,
For you, that might be true. But you
but
can't
maybe for
make every
somebody else
person
that
who's
could
a
still work.
Rahu into a bad guy.
Not that they're a bad person, just that they're not my person. Like
Well,
I don't want
not for
to
you, but I'm
even
saying if
have
you're looking
coffee.
for other people, if you're looking for other people,
Yeah,
yes, you've learned for
that
yourself.
they're not. Yeah, they're not.
Somebody who's a
They're
Rahu
not. They could be like a
AK could be
friend or like
perfect,
they're not a bad person, but it.
right? For
Sorry.
you, I would say it's a no-go because you've experienced it all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, been there, done that.
don't let that color you looking for somebody else. That's all I'm saying.
What do you mean? Like in other people's charts
Yeah.
or
Like if you're looking at two other people's charts,
yeah, for somebody
and
else that could be an okay, that's not a deal breaker
exactly,
like across the board.
exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like that can color because of my own experience, perception, start to color the way I see other people's. It's hard not to. It's hard to separate that kind of stuff
Because
sometimes,
like
but
if I did that to you, I would be like, oh yeah, my ex-husband, he was a total narcissist and he was a son, Atmakarika. So I got to watch out for Julie. No way. I mean, that's not fair at all.
Yeah.
Because you're not that at all, right? Totally different sons, totally different. So I'm just saying, be careful. Like we study our own charts because I think I'm into studying our own charts and our husbands and our, people, because that's who we know the most. There are lineages where they say,
Yeah.
don't look at your chart, which I think is weird. It's not, I feel like we know ourselves the best. We should use our charts and those close to us to learn astrology.
Yeah.
But then there's that careful moment where we have to say, okay, even though this chart might look the same, that person isn't the same. And so we have to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
It's just careful. We do learn things from our own charts and our own experience, and we can put them in our little bank of experience. But you just have to be careful
Yeah.
applying it to somebody else that you don't know.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. Any other
Because
questions?
yeah, it is hard for me to even see a Rahu AK person. And like it's a little bit like like even though like I'm not like I made a friend and it was like and then I found out she was one and like I didn't want to like throw her out, you know what I mean?
They
But
can
at the
be
same
really
time it's
fun.
hard for me. I'm like but it definitely sets off a little trigger for me where I'm just like be careful. I'm not gonna trust you totally. You know what I mean? Like I'm just gonna
I do.
careful.
That said, I've been lately identifying as a Rahu Atmakarika because in true node calculation I am. If I shift
Oh
the
really?
true node mean node, I shift. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll change your mind, Julie.
Well, as I'm saying, like my bigger understanding is that like enemy relationships are our greatest teachers too.
True.
Like what I was saying with the 7, 6, 8 going on with her and the lessons she has to learn, like some of that can be so good in a relationship because it's like here's something that you're gonna work on, and like that's why we're here to work and grow, and you know what I mean? Like with my ex, he wasn't a Karka. He was also like a dear friend of mine for like 7 years before we were there was something there for us to work on.
Melanie, thanks. She's leaving.
Okay.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, I got to jump off too because I
but you
got
know what I'm
another
saying? It's just
appointment.
like, yeah, it's like so see, when you see like those red flags in a relationship, like some things that are generally good but have a couple red flag situations, it could just kind of contribute to like the attraction and the pull. You know what I mean?
I agree. I agree with you. It's like um, just because there's a red flag doesn't mean we should run away. I think it means we should pay attention. Red flag means like, hey, there could be something here. Maybe there's not, though. Maybe there is. Just pay
Yeah.
attention. I feel like that's what a flag means, right?
Yeah. I like saying orange flag now too because it's like it's not red. Maybe it's orange. Maybe just a yellow flag. Like
Yellow flag. Yeah, maybe
it's
we
not
should talk about
green.
yellow flags more.
Yeah,
All right,
like
so
it's not
cool.
green, but it's not red.
It's not green, it's not red.
Like orangish yellow.
From different angles, it looks like a different color. So, yeah, it's not black and white at all. None of this stuff is. It's really
Yeah,
we have to be super careful and thoughtful and patient and humble.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think you did a really good job with that back when I was talking to you a lot about my relationship of being very gentle and kind of letting me figure it out. But it's like an art form. It's like
It is.
knowing how to deliver this stuff because
Yeah.
sometimes it's bad news. Giving bad news is a
It's so
hard
hard and it's
thing to
not
do.
fun. And even I need work on that. So it's, we're all in it together. Um, all right, Julie, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Melanie, thank you for coming. Everybody else who watches us in the future, I hope you liked it. Join Astrology Hackers or whatever we name it. And we're going to do another one in December. I'll come up with either relationships part two or I'm taking suggestions too. So if you have ideas you want to talk about, hit me up and we'll talk about it.
Sounds good.
All right, cool. Julie, thanks for coming. Everybody, bye-bye. Have a great day. Till next time.